Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at an initial offering from the company Rogue Horology. In this debut offering, they are calling the Type 1. Rogue was founded to effectively bring everyday tool watches that were rugged, reliable, but at the same time were very affordable and didn't break the bank. This one it is a prototype. It was actually loaned into to the channel, so I do want to mention that up front. This one, however, has already been fully funded on Kickstarter, so that campaign is closed, but it is available now for pre-order on their website. So as of time of publishing, I'll have a link down in the description for the company site to pre-order this, and of course all the other information, Amazon affiliate links, all that kind of good stuff if you want to help out the channel. Much appreciated. So with that, let's go ahead and get into some of the specifics of this particular model. As I mentioned, this is a prototype, so I don't yet have the packaging material. I believe that's all being finalized. It may be in hand, but I did not receive that as part of this. But what I do have is the specs for this. It is going to come with a 1-year warranty, and as we'll talk about, with the reliable components they're using in here, should be readily serviceable even beyond that if you are concerned about anything there. Plus, it should be a very reliable piece in and of itself. As for the specs, they measure it in at 41 millimeters, and I believe going from here to here. I measure at 41 actually at the crown guard, so going from this case side over to the crown guard from roughly the 3 to 9 position, I get 41 millimeters. If you eliminate those crown guards, I get right at 40 millimeters. And then if we look at the bezel, this one actually drops down, so it has almost a millimeter, or just over a millimeter rather, step down for that. So that's coming in at 38.9 millimeters for this heavily knurled bezel. The lugs on this, it does have a standard size, and as you can see, it's almost a Genta style or integrated look to that, but of course this is, as you can see here, a 2-piece, and this does have standard 20 millimeter lugs, so it will be strap change friendly if you want to pick up any straps using those Amazon affiliate links or otherwise. Flipping over to the lug to lug, you can see this one is coming in at 47.5, and we do have, of course, slight downturn to the lugs, nice squared off. And then here you can see this does have female end links, so you're not going to have any additional protrusion. So that is going to be your true lug to lug on the wrist, making that a pretty versatile overall size. Not on the smallest size that's around, but at the same time, that's going to be plenty large enough, I think, to fill up most larger wrists. The thickness on this, I was getting thicker on my calipers than they list on their website. I had this coming in at 13.75 millimeters, a little bit on the chunky side, especially given its size, but I don't think that's too bad overall, especially for a dive watch. I didn't find it wore overly chunky, but we'll talk about that more as we get into the characteristics. This one does come with, as you can see here, a flat crystal, and this is a sapphire crystal and does have an inner AR coating. As for the movement, this one, despite not having a date window, this does come with the Seiko NH35, great reliable movement. That being said, do note that you will have the phantom or ghost date position at position 1. Not a big deal, no functional impact, just something I know some people like to make note of. As far as water resistance, this one does have 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance, which is right in line with where I would expect a dive style watch to come in. As far as weight, this one tips the scale a little heavier than I would expect given its overall size and profile. And let's go ahead and while we're looking at that, pop this on wrist, get a preview there. This one, though, is coming in size to my 6.5-inch wrist. This is coming in at 151.8 grams. So certainly, it's not a real heavy watch, and I don't think on wrist it feels too bad at all. I've never really felt like this was, pressing down or weighing down, so I was kind of surprised by the overall weight at almost 152 grams there, because that is what I would expect for a little heavier watch. I suspect that that's with the bulkier case, a little bit thicker, etc., but really not too bad at all. So I would say that that's pretty much right in normal range for that one. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at some of the characteristics of this actual watch, see what it's like to live with, what did I like, what did I dislike, look at it in different conditions, etc. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at the colors. If you saw this one on the Kickstarter campaign, there were actually 7 colors available. From their website, it appears though that there's going to be 4 offered on this pre-order. Of course, the blue that we're looking at today. There will additionally be a black, a full lume version, and also a vintage, which is of course a black with like a vintage style lume for that. So they do have a nice range for color options. Shifting over to the actual dials and looking at some of the characteristics there, as you can see, it does have a very pronounced radial pattern, and it is a sunburst to that. You get nice light play from it, and I really like that the radial etching in there is a little more aggressive than I've seen some other. Not pronouncedly so, doesn't look like a full guilloche or anything like that, but it does have enough that it draws your eye and it causes you to take attention and notice. One of the other characteristics of this that you'll notice right off the bat is it does have like a crosshair pattern, so going from the cardinal direction, so your 12 to 6 and your 3 to 9, it does have that real subtle crosshair line that runs through, and I think it's a nice touch. I think it helps it to orient, but also it just makes it a little different from everything else that's out there. On the dial, you can see at the 12 o'clock position as well as the 6 o'clock position, it does have your printed logo, and then down at the 6 o'clock, it has, of course, just the model name, the Type 1, and the 200 meters. Shifting out to the outer perimeter, you can see that this does have a printed minute and second track, and that does go all the way around, so nice, easy legibility there. Shifting over to the hardware, as you can see here, you might have noticed in the pictures that we popped up versus the prototype that we're looking at today, this does still have pencil hands, but on the production model, they are actually beefing up those hands, which I think was a good call. Not only to improve legibility overall, but I just think it looks a little more cohesive for the overall layout. Everything looks a little more proportionate. So that is something to note, that difference there. Looking at the second hand, I'm not certain whether the second hand changes or not. It looks bigger to me in the pictures. I saw and confirmed that the hour and minute hand were larger, and I believe the second hand as well. It is as well, but don't quote me on that. Look at the pictures that we popped up there, and you'll see the difference in what that looks like. Shifting over to the markers, you can see that this does have applied markers all the way around. It does have larger markers at your 12, 3, 6, and 9 position as you move around the perimeter. The markers, it's going to be a mix here. So if you look at the handset, you would notice that that is a gloss finish or texture to that. Whereas if you look at the markers, that's more of a satin or a brush texture to that. So it does have nice contrast between those two. Additionally, you might have noticed that there is Lume applied, of course, to all the markers, as well as to each of the 3 hands. And that Lume is a Super Luminova BGW9. And I will tell you, let's go ahead and shift over and look at this for the Lume. This does not disappoint. This Lume, I was actually very pleasantly surprised with this. Natural charging with UV light. However I use this, in every situation and circumstance, I found that this actually performed very well overall. So that's pretty impressive and does seem to be well applied. Shifting back to the actual watch, the bezel on this one, as you can see, of course, it does have a dive style bezel. This one, as such, is a 120 click. And as we saw a moment ago, this does have nice knurling all the way around there, which I think is aesthetically pleasing. And I think it fits the kind of vintage vibe for this overall. Let's go ahead and listen to that bezel action. Good tactile click as it goes through. You get a nice pronounced move through that, and we'll talk about this bezel action. I'll go ahead and give a little bit of a spoiler for that. As you might have seen there, I kind of almost have to push onto this. If I try to grip, there's not a lot of lip to grip onto, so despite the fact that it has a nice knurling, I found this, you can kind of slip, especially as you come across the case. Obviously, I can do it, don't get me wrong, so it is usable, but I find it to be a little bit hard to grab and manipulate, so I've actually found I kind of push down into it, and that gets me a little better and easier manipulation and action for it. Of course, you might get some smudges on the crystal in the process, but that being said, it works well enough, nothing really to complain about. Not overly stiff, and it's, I think, a decent action for that one. The bezel insert on this, you might have noticed this does have an aluminum bezel insert, and it does have an alluring and eye-catching two-tone application. I really like this touch. It's something that looks different. While I do generally prefer to have ceramic bezel inserts for scratch resistance and for overall wear, I can't fault it. I went back and forth on this. For the aluminum insert, you couldn't have achieved the same thing with ceramic, or at least not that I have seen, and accordingly, I like the touch, so I think for the price point this is coming in at, looking that this is supposed to be an everyday beater or daily kind of watch, I think it was a good call for that, so I'm not going to complain about that piece. And of course, as we saw, the bezel itself is lumed as well. Shifting over to the actual case, as we already talked about, this has somewhat of a Genta case shape, almost looks like an integrated bracelet for the overall case design. Flipping over to the side, you can see that this has somewhat of a slab side, though the top edge is broken. A sort of chamfer, though it does, as you can see here, it has kind of a complex cut to that, so it's not just a straight chamfer. And then that chamfer does have polishing there. So you get a nice mix of linear brushing, as you can see here, as well as polishing on the lips, and that is, I believe, on the underside. The underside is slightly broken, but does not have polishing down there as well. So for the case shape here, you can see it's a traditional, almost like hammerhead kind of case shape to this. Shallow downturned lugs, and the case back, as we'll talk about later on throughout the video. As you can see, the case back does sit definitely proud of the downturned lugs, so it does still sit off of your wrist with that for overall characteristics. Flipping over to the opposite side here, you can see this does have integrated crown guards, and it does continue cohesively with the overall finishing throughout that. The main things to notice for the case is, of course, it's angular, it's sharp, but without having anything that was bothersome in terms of sharp edges to it. So I think it really achieved the vintage style vibe for that. Going over to the crown itself, you might have noticed the crown on this, it's not your camera, it's not your screen, it is in fact a tiny crown. This one's coming in at 4.8 millimeters. I expected when I saw this crown and when I got that caliper spec, I expected that it was going to be hard to manipulate. Surprisingly, with that great knurling it has, it is very easy to grip a hold of. So that's one that, while I would generally prefer a little bit larger crown, and I think the same is still true here, I do find that it's still easy enough to grab a hold of, so that's not really too much of a complaint. And this is, of course, as you'd expect, a screw down crown, as you saw me manipulating there. We already talked about the integrated crown guards, which I do think are cleanly cut into this overall case shape, and I think blend well. The crown is, as you can see here, signed with the Rogue logo, and of course, as we talked about, the knurling does match between the bezel and crown, so I would have liked to have seen a little more surface area on that bezel, because as good as this is to turn, I think this could have been better to turn if it was just a hair taller, just to get a little more surface area to grip a hold of. Shifting over to the case back, the case back on this one is going to be a relatively clean and simple design. As you can see, I believe that this is lasered. It's not deeply cut into there, so there's no sharp edges. And then, of course, does just continue overall with that brushed finish and texture. And then the laser, if we can get the camera to stay in focus, the lasered in there with the logo, as well as the dial text with just your basic information if you want to pause that and check that out. But it's the things we already talked about. So overall, I think that's nicely done. And of course, that is the screw down case back, as you'd expect for a dive watch. Shifting over to the bracelet, as you can see, this is kind of a beads of rice style bracelet. The reason I say kind of is it does have the aesthetic and visual of beads of rice, but these are not individuals. So as best I can tell from sizing this, these do appear to be one piece. So in many respects, I would say this wears almost like an oyster bracelet as far as the way it drapes, but it does have nice short links to that. So overall, I find that this does drape pretty well on the wrist. Just don't expect that this is going to have the full flex like you would get from a traditional beads of rice. It is a little more similar to an oyster, but that's not to complain about the comfort. That's just something to note. This bracelet does taper. It starts at, of course, the 20 millimeters at the top, and then it goes down to roughly 18, which I get 17.8 millimeters down at the clasp. This does, as we already mentioned, have FEMO end links, great addition there, and of course that does cause it to drape flat down against the case back, so it's very accommodating of a multitude of wrist sizes. This does attach with, as you can see there, screws for this, so this is not going to be a pin and collar system. So of course, do put on a dab of Loctite, but at the same time, this will be nice and easy to get sized. Shifting over to the clasp, as we've seen here, this of course just has a fold over for the safety. It is a basic push-pull style pop, so it does not have your double pushers, and it does have 4 micro adjust. The clasp itself is relatively small in form factor. The bridge is a little bit on the long side compared to the clasp, but in relative terms, this is still a relatively short bridge overall, but plenty of clearance to get over my hand on my 6.5-inch wrist. All right, so now that we have a better idea of what this watch is like overall, let's go ahead and look at a couple sort of comparables. So this one, I wanted to go ahead and put this in next to, this is the Batavi Architect that we've looked at in the past. As you can see, similar case shape with the overall kind of Genta inspiration. This one is in fact an integrated bracelet, whereas this one is just a faux or kind of integrated look to that. But here's an idea as far as how this compares. Of course, the Batavi looks a lot larger as far as dial area, but of course the bezel is playing a big role in that. Shifting over to get to one that has sort of that same kind of case shape, but that is more of a traditional diver, is a diver rather. This one has the rotating bezel as well. This is the RZE Endeavor, and we've looked at this on the channel, the prototype, as well as just recently did an unboxing of my personal ones. And you can see there, of course, this does look smaller there as well. I found wrist presence doesn't hurt for this. I do think some larger wristed folks might prefer a little larger if you like larger watches, but I think anyone that's at, I would say 7.25 or smaller, this is plenty adequate. And if you have larger and just don't mind a watch that wears a little bit smaller, the case presence of this still gives you plenty there, but the dial is a little bit small, kind of like a Hammerhead 3, though not set back as much, and that's the Zelos Hammerhead 3 that we've looked at. All right, so now let's go ahead and wrap this up for overall thoughts. First, some of the positives. The price, right off the bat, I've got to say, the price for this, they're knocking it out of the park. This one's coming in at $249, including shipping for the pre-order price. That is, I think, a fantastic value. Getting something that's well applied with Lume, getting good overall for the finishing. It's solid. It's not going to be necessarily the nicest finish that I've ever seen, but at the same time, for the price point, I don't think it's too bad either. Additionally, getting sapphire crystal, NH35 reliable movement, I think that comes in solidly. The dial finish. As we already talked about, I really like the dial finishing. I think the dial looks great on this one. I think it is aesthetically pleasing. I think it has good light play. I like it. The legibility, especially once they kick up that handset size, I think legibility is solid on this as well. So that's definitely a plus. The size, I think, is relatively versatile, as we already talked about with the caveats there, depending on preferences. I do think it's a good size mix, so I think it'll cover most viewers. Additionally, overall, I think that this has nice color choices. I really liked especially the range that they had on Kickstarter, but that being said, I think they have a nice spread across their pre-order offerings as well. And then finally, as we've already talked about, the Lume. The Lume is excellent. I think they did a great job there. No complaints whatsoever on that front. So now let's shift over to some of the critiques. As we look in at this, you might notice that some of the finishing on this, it leaves a little bit to be desired. And I will say, of course, this is a prototype. You can see marking there on the 6 o'clock marker. You can notice a little bit of sloppiness to the application of the Lume. Can see some spillover there and a little bit of bleed on that. The handset has a little bit of coarseness to it. Of course, keep in mind the price point for this. This is not going to be a high ticket item here, but I would like to see that cleaned up on the production model. And I suspect that will be the case. Again, with a prototype, a lot of times that kind of stuff does happen, but it is something I wanted to note. The case back. We talked about this. I do think that the case back, I would have liked to have seen, even if it meant the mid case was a little bit taller, I would have liked to have seen the case back shrunken down. I prefer when the watch sits a little more flush to the wrist. This, I find, does sit a little bit proud as it's sitting on your wrist, and I'm not a huge fan of that kind of like floating saucer kind of effect or experience on there. Not bad to wear on the wrist, just aesthetically not something that I personally prefer, so I've liked that seen that sit a little deeper on the wrist. Ideally, if this had like a Miyota, which of course would increase the price, that would potentially shrink it down and sit a little deeper. Otherwise, I think it's good as is. As far as the crown, we already talked about the sizing for that. Aesthetically, I would have liked to have seen it kicked up. Functionally, I don't think that this needs to be any larger than it is. I think it's already plenty good. The clasp, I'm not a huge fan, as I've mentioned in the past, of the push-pull style kind of mechanism. I would have rather seen a double pusher, but no real big complaints there. And then finally, as we talked about, the bezel grip. I think the bezel grip could have been improved just by a little more surface area. So that's a somewhat of a little ding for that, and one that will carry forward. But of course, it's not a huge functional issue for that, and it's of course preference-based depending on how, one, how much you're going to be using it, and two, whether you actually can grip steadily onto there or not. So pretty minor issues overall, and that kind of brings us to our summary. There's some very minor recommendations and critiques that I have through this, but nothing real noteworthy for that. Overall, I think considering the fact that this is a prototype, considering the $249 value for this, or the pricing for this, I think you're getting a great value overall. And I think they hit the overall objective, which is to bring in an affordable, everyday tool-style watch that you could wear, you could beat up, and not be losing too much sleep over if you get some scratches, nicks, dings, etc. And I think they hit that mark well. So with that in mind, I think that this one, if you are in the market for this style diver, if you like a little bit of the Genta flavor but don't want to spend a lot of money, if you're looking for just a reliable, good-looking, everyday piece, I think this is definitely a winner. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy this, if you could please hit that like button, it's greatly appreciated and does help the channel. Additionally, let me know what you think in the comments section. And then finally, if you haven't already, the best thing you can do to help is to hit that subscribe button. So thank you for watching. Again, Amazon affiliate links in the description if you want to help out the channel in that way. And if you're looking for another medium, you can find me on Instagram. Thanks for watching.